Okay, good morning, everybody. Shabbat Tov, Boker Tov, and thank you all for coming. The week of Pesach. We're not after Shabbat Hagadol, we're after the Shabbat Hagadol Drasha. Of course, this year Shabbat Hagadol is Erev Pesach. So it makes things a little bit more complicated in some aspects. Makes things a little bit easier in some aspects as well. Every year it's always a challenge. You get to Shabbat Hagadol and you've kashed the house and you have to have chametz. This way, everything is kashed before. We discussed last week exactly how to navigate the meals of Shabbat, but it's a very, very busy time. So I thank you all for clearing time from your busy schedule to be here and engage in preparation for Pesach of a different kind, no less important. Some might say even more important. Okay, so last week we discussed in general terms Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat, the unique halachot that we have this year, which you can, after Pesach, you can forget them all for the next 20 years. But today, I thought we'd talk a little bit more generally about Hilchot Leil HaSeder, which we should remember over the next 20 years as well. Every year we go through again, but of course the whole year in between to forget things, and there are a lot of mitzvot and a lot of complicated details regarding Leil HaSeder. So maybe before that, I thought to start off, and again, you don't have text in front of you, by the way. If anybody's interested after this, there is a unit in Soma B'Rabbanan dealing with Hilchot Leil HaSeder. I'll be using some of that. If anybody would like digital copy of that, let me know afterwards and I'll give you access. But let's just talk in terms of Leil HaSeder itself. So are there Leil HaSeder being on Motzei Shabbat? As we spoke last week, we talk about Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat. Why don't we talk about Seder on Motzei Shabbat? And the reason is because Seder on Motzei Shabbat is relatively straightforward. We just do what we normally do, right? Shabbat is where it gets complicated. However, there are a number of things to be aware of. So I'll just say, first of all, in terms of preparation for the Seder, okay, we're still deliberating exactly what time we'll be davening Mariv on Seder night. But the point is, you can't start the Seder and you can't start preparing for the Seder until nightfall. So anything that needs to be done in order to prepare for the Seder should be done really before Yom Tov. So if we think about the Ka'arat Seder, there are also halachic issues in terms of preparing certain things. For example, we have the Zroa and the Beitzah that are on the Seder plate. These are the two items which we have on the Seder plate. We don't eat them. We don't eat them at the Seder, at least. You can eat them the next day if you wish. But why do we have the Zroa and the Beitzah? We have two cooked foods. These are reminiscent of the two korbanot that would be brought. We have the korban chagiga and we have the korban pesach. Now we don't eat them. They are roasted. Okay, and the rule is these should be roasted before Yom Tov because you cannot read before Shabbat, because obviously on Shabbat you cannot cook, and on Yom Tov ordinarily you could cook, but if you're not going to eat it, then it's not ochel nefesh. You would not be allowed to roast it either. So therefore, that should be prepared in advance. Also, the charoset, the salt water, the washing the lettuce, all these things should be done in advance of Shabbat, so that A, we avoid any halachic issues, and B, we avoid having to wait unnecessarily to start the Seder. Setting the table and heating up the foods, etc., that also cannot be done until after Shabbat. Normally, when we have if we have a Rosh Hashanah, for example, you have a 2-day Yom Tov, and the second night, so everybody's always very worried because it's going to take a long time for your food to heat up. Yeah, we don't have to worry about how long it's going to take the food to heat up. We have the whole Seder to get through, so we put the stuff on the hot plate at the beginning. That will be fine. That's not a problem. In Tefillah, as we mentioned, in Tefillah on Motzei Shabbat, we add in the paragraph of Vatodi'enu because we are making Havdalah from Shabbat to Yom Tov. Yom Tov is a lower level of Kedusha than Shabbat. And then we make Havdalah again when we get home. When we begin the Seder, we have the special formulation of Yakne Haz. Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, and Zman. It's very easy to remember because it's all printed in the Haggadah. So we just follow the order of the brachot. We use the Yom Tov candles as the Havdalah candles. We have 1 cup of wine. Ordinarily, when we make Havdalah on a Motzei Shabbat, we like to have the wine overflowing. Yeah, we don't do that because it's primarily the cup of Kiddush. We also use it for Havdalah, but it would not be so respectful if we have all the wine dripping all over the place, and therefore we don't. That's not required. Somebody asked me a question which might come up. I mean, the order of because you have the ner during Kiddush. So I know in some of the hotels they're told that they're not allowed to bring the candles into the Chadar Ochel, and they have to say the bracha outside. So somebody came and asked me, he said, "What should we do? Can we change the order of the?" So I don't know exactly what is done and what the regulations are in each and every hotel. First of all, I told him to speak to the mashgiach, And I'll just say, as a general point, a couple of years ago, it was during COVID, I was in a meeting of Rabbanim with some of the Dayanim of the London Beit Din. And the Rabbanim were asking certain questions. Can we be lenient on this? And can we be lenient on that? And can we change the halacha here? Because it's an extenuating circumstance. It's a shatat chak. And I remember one of the Dayanim said, he said, listen, before we start changing halacha, you have to look at what the reality is. Is it really a shatat chak? Right? Sometimes there's a very simple solution, and you don't have to go and find all sorts of kulot. So that's the first thing. It may be there's a light, I don't know, they have a designated place, the hotel will allow one to bring in a candle, etc. So before we start changing the order and trying to change the halacha, let's just look at the practicalities and see where it is possible. One other interesting thing which does change, perhaps, in terms of the Haggadah, which is unique to this Yom Motzei Shabbat, we have the bracha of Asher Ga'alanu. By the way, it's fascinating. We'll talk in a moment about the order of mitzvot that we have on the Seder night. Now, there are only two mitzvot d'oraita that we have on the Seder night. We have the mitzvah of Achilat Matzah, and we have the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. During the time of the Beit HaMikdash, we had many more. We had Korban Pesach, we had Maror, which was d'oraita. Nowadays, more is Rabbanan, etc. But so of one of the two mitzvot that are d'oraita on the Seder night, mitzvah Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, where's the bracha? Where's the bracha? Why do we not? Surely we should start off, whether you say Hineni Muchan Muzaman or not. Okay, there are different minhagim, but we begin Magid, and we should say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'saper b'tziat Mitzrayim. We've been waiting a whole year for this. This is the highlight. This is the central mitzvah of the Seder. Why is there no bracha? So there are many, many different answers which are given. One beautiful answer, and I think the Khatam Sofer says it. He says that, generally speaking, we have a principle when it comes to brachot, that we have to say the bracha, what's called over la'asiyatan, which means I say the bracha, brikot mitzvot, we're talking about, I say the bracha just before I fulfill the mitzvah, right? That's actually learned in the Gemara Pesachim, the whole sugya about. So, right, so when we're about to hear the shofar, we say the bracha lishma kol shofar, and then we blow the shofar. We hold the lulav, right? And we know we hold the etrog, we hold it upside down, so that we have not yet fulfilled the mitzvah. We say the bracha, we hold it together the right way up, we shake the lulav, right? All the mitzvot, we say the bracha over la'asiyatan just before we fulfill the mitzvah. One exception to that is brought in the is a ger. A ger who converts, right? So he would say so before the tefillah, we say, what about the bracha? So the ger cannot say a bracha before the tefillah. Why? Because they're not Jewish yet. It's only afterwards only after that you would be able to say it. So we find a similar idea when it comes to Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. On the night of Pesach, we are not telling stories of the past. We are not talking about history. We spoke about this on Shabbat a little. We are reliving, we are reenacting, we're going through it again. We're going through the process of going me'avdut lechairut, going from slavery to freedom. So if we would begin by saying the bracha at the beginning of the night, we're not free yet. We're still slaves. We're still stuck in Egypt. It's only when we get to the end that we've come out. So therefore, we get to the end of Magid and we say the bracha Asher Ga'alanu. So there are those who say that is the bracha that relates to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, you'll ask, I'm sure your minds are all racing ahead and you're all thinking of this question, but this is a question which comes up throughout the Seder night, throughout the Haggadah, if you think about it, which is what I just said correct? Is that really the order of things? Right at the beginning of the Seder, we have karpas. Why do we have karpas? So there are different explanations that are given. One is, we take this vegetable, we take this appetizer, we dip it, and we eat it. Who does that? That was the practice of the wealthy. That was the practice of the aristocratic. That was the practice of free. So right at the beginning of the Seder, we say we're free. And then right at the end, we eat the matzah, when matzah represents freedom. And then we eat the maror, which represents that we're finished now. We should begin the Seder with the maror. And at the end, we should have the matzah. So, and if you go through the entire Haggadah and you go through the entire thing, and I would posit you to look out for this on the Seder night. Which actions or things that we're doing relate to slavery and which things relate to freedom? It's not in order. So That itself is a question, and I'd like to answer it, but maybe a little bit later on. Now that I've got your curiosity. Okay, so but that's one explanation regarding the bracha of Asher Ge'alanu. There's another explanation. I've shared it here before, but I'll share it again. It's good enough. Which is of why we don't say a bracha. Beautiful explanation of the Sfat Emet, right? And this we've spoken about, where there are certain, I think even before Purim we discussed it, that there are certain brachot which are ben adam lachavero, certain mitzvot ben adam lachavero, where we don't say a bracha. There is no bracha of bikur cholim. There is no bracha of gemilut chasadim. There is no bracha on kibbur avaim. There is no bracha on staka. And there are a number of reasons why that is. But one explanation that is given is that whenever I do an action which should be a spontaneous action for somebody else, right? We don't want to risk that it should become ritual. We don't want to risk that it should become ritual. There's a famous story of Rav Hutner when he was lying in hospital, and one of the Talmidim wanted to come visit him. He said, "I'm not your lulav," right? He said, when we do something, if I go and if I offer a kind word to somebody, do a favor for somebody, so that's a very nice thing. Why should I do that to that person? I do it because that's the way that you should treat other people. It happens to be that we're commanded and it's a mitzvah and we'll get schar, even better. But imagine a scenario, right? A person comes home and we're now in the middle of Nisan, in the middle of Pesach cleaning, whatever. And the father says to say, I've been working hard all day. Can you go get me a cup of tea? And the son says, sure, Abba. And he stops and he says, I'm going to fulfill the mitzvah. Baruch atah Hashem, and the father, he'll look at him and say, I'm not your lulav, just go and give me a cup of tea, right? It's not, we don't want to turn it into something ritualistic, something formalistic. We want it to be spontaneous. It should come out. It should be, who we are, and that's what we're doing. So the Sfat Emet says, Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, why are you telling the story on Seder night? You're not telling the story because it says in the Haggadah you have to tell the story. You're telling the story because you were a slave and you've become free and you have witnessed miracles and you want to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and you have a spontaneous outpouring of thanks and of emotion. If we manage to get to a situation on the Seder night where we are talking and we're not looking at our watches and saying, are we there yet? When are we going to have the food? But if we are, maybe even if we are doing that because we're hungry, it's okay, it's late. But we're telling the story not by rote, not because we have to, but because we want to, because we genuinely feel thanks. And again, we have so much to feel thankful for over the last period, along with all the difficulties. And maybe that's the answer, by the way, to the question I raised of the order, of the haphazard order of the things in the Haggadah. But if we can reach that point, so we don't need to say a bracha, right? That's then we'll know that we've done and we've achieved something great on the Seder. Okay. But in any event, we have the bracha of Asher Ge'alanu, now, which is towards the end of Magid. Now, part of this bracha, we daven for what will be when we will have the Beit HaMikdash once again, and we say, V'nochal sham min ha'psachim u'min ha'zvachim. We will eat there from, remember, 2 cooked foods on the Seder plate representing 2 different korbanot. You have the korban Pesach and you have the korban Chagiga. In fact, the way that it was is that you would eat from the korban Chagiga first, and only then you would eat from the korban Pesach, because the korban Pesach is meant to be eaten ala sofa, when you are already satiated, not when you're stuffed. It's not achila gasa, but it's meant to be that I'm not starving and I'm not hungry, right? I've eaten the zevachot. So the general order of the bracha, we say nochal sham min ha'psachim u'min ha'zvachim. Now there are different opinions. Do we say, what's the order of the bracha? Do we say min ha'psachim u'min ha'zvachim, or do we say min ha'zvachim u'min ha'psachim? So, generally speaking, we say, actually, the order of the bracha should be min ha'zvachim first, and then min ha'psachim. There are those who write that in this year, there is no zevach, because on Shabbat, we spent it last week, on Shabbat, you could bring the korban Pesach, but you wouldn't bring any other korbanot. So therefore, we should say min ha'psachim, that's why we changed the order. Okay, so people should. There's a difference of opinion amongst Ashkenazim, Sfardim, exactly what we do. Either way, why is there a machloket about it? Because some say it relates to this year, and some say no, the bracha relates to what we'll do next year. Meaning, last year we should have changed the order around because it's relating to what's going to be the next year. But then we say, no, we don't relate to the next year because we daven that the Beit HaMikdash will come in the meantime, and we'll have a Sanhedrin, and then we'll have Kiddush HaChodesh, and then we don't know which day of the week it's going to be anyway. So, okay, bottom line is, generally speaking, Ashkenazim would say, min ha-psachim u min ha-zvachim. Again, it's very easy to remember. You just follow what it says in your Haggadah, but you will see in the Haggadah that in that bracha, you'll have brackets that will say, when it's on Motzei Shabbat, you say this, so that is what you say. B'di'evet, if you said it in this order, if you said it in that order, you've still fulfilled the mitzvah, you've still said the bracha. Okay. So I heard a beautiful analogy in terms of something that we do on Seder night. We do something which is unique. We do many things which are unique. At the beginning, we have this idea of the Simanei HaSeder, right? The 15 steps, Kadesh, Ruchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, etc. There are those who sing them, there are those who read them, there are those who skip them altogether. Why do we say them? Why do we need this? So I heard the analogy was a family went on holiday, or they went on vacation. And they the first day they planned to go to a certain area, and they got there, and they've said, sorry, it's closed today. Okay, so the next day they went, and they went somewhere else, and they said, no, you can't come today. There's a very important person who's come to visit, and therefore it's been closed to the public. Remember, this actually happened to me once, years ago. We came when we were on holiday. We went to mini Israel, and we got there, and we were at the gates, and they said, sorry, you can't come today. The Prime Minister's visiting. Okay, it wasn't Bibi. But anyway, that's how long ago it was. But in any event, so these things happen. So then the next day, before they know it, the whole vacation's finished, and they haven't gone anywhere. But if they would plan at the beginning, and they would look up, it's not that hard today. You can check on the internet. You can ask ChatGPT if you want, right? Where is this place? When is this place? When is it going to be open? You know what the destination is. You plan the journey in advance. Then you can go, and then you can have, and then you can take advantage of all the sights and sounds. So the same thing on the Seder night. There is so much happening. There are so many things going on in the Seder night, and sometimes we can really miss it. We can really miss it if we don't start planning. So that's why we're all sitting here now, right? We have a whole week. By the way, this is another advantage that we have on Shabbat. Everybody's complaining, well, Shabbat, we have to wake up early. We have to daven at 7 o'clock, right? Those who will be here. It's very early. But you have so much longer throughout the day. What are we going to do? So we have time to look at the Haggadah and prepare for Pesach, and really to rest and to come in a way, prepared in a way that we may not be in other years, but we're able to chart the roadmap of the Seder itself, because it's so complicated and so many things happening. So I think maybe the easiest way, the best framework to think about this is if we think to ourselves, what are the mitzvot that we are fulfilling on the Seder night, and work based on that. So let me ask you a question. How many mitzvot are there on the Seder night? Somebody's got to say 4, right? Four is always the number. So, what? At least four. So listen to this. I'll read you something quite remarkable. So it's brought in the Abu Draham, who's one of the Rishonim, who says the following. There is a pasuk that we say 4 times in the Haggadah. If you were at the shir last week, you'll know which pasuk that is, right? Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeitim Mitzrayim. So the Abu Draham says the following. He says, Ba'avur zeh is a hint. He says zeh in gematria, but just for Eli, we've got gematrias, right? So what is zeh in gematria? 12. And therefore he said, because there are 12 mitzvot that a person fulfills on the Seder night. What are the 12 mitzvot that he counts? And again, it depends how we count mitzvot, right? So he says 4 cups of wine, charoset, karpas, 2 netilat yadayim, hamotzi, matzah, maror, and korech. So he gets to 12. 12 mitzvot, right? There's one obvious one which he didn't mention there, which is Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? Telling the story of so the Chidah, right, says Lo Atzalim not Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, Dehu Moneh Mitzvot Ma'asiyot Velo Mitzvot Shem B'Dibur Levad. Okay, he's talking about when he says 12 mitzvot, the mitzvot which have an action, which have a ma'aseh, not just mitzvot which are in speech. Okay, anyways, the Vilna Gaon, it's brought down, had a different cheshbon. The Vilna Gaon said, how many mitzvot are there on the Seder night? Oh. No, you're right. It's a bit like, the section, how many makot were there in Mitzrayim, were different things. So the Vilna Gaon says 64 mitzvot on the Seder night. And it says that the Talmidim tried to work out what were the 64, and they all came to 64, but they all had a different cheshbon. It depends what you count. It's like, we have the Tariag mitzvot. Everybody agrees there are Tariag mitzvot. What is included? What isn't included? How do you count? So again, depending on how you count. So this can be, if people start getting bored at your Seder, you can say to them, take the Haggadah, go see if you can count, see if you can get to 64 mitzvot, according to the Vilna Gaon. The point is, there are many, many, many mitzvot, and again, it depends how we count them. One, which is very interesting, by the way, and again, this relates to the question which I mentioned before. Is there a mitzvah of charoset? We know we have charoset on the Seder plate. We dip in the charoset, we shake it off, etc. So the Rambam writes in Ochot Chametz U'Matzah, he says, "Bizman hazeh she'en sham korban, achar shemevarech hamotzi lechem u'mevarech al achilat matzah." He says, we say the bracha of hamotzi lechem, and we say the bracha on matzah, u'metabel matzah b'charoset ve'ocher. Okay, and then he says you dip the matzah in charoset. This is not our minhag, but he says it's part of the mitzvah. The Raavad, who writes his commentary on his Hasagot on the Rambam, and as you all know, did not mince his words when he thought that the Rambam was incorrect. He writes, he says that's two words, hevel, absolute nonsense. Say I don't agree. Say we don't do that. Hevel. What's going on? There is a very, very fierce machloket here between the Rambam and the Raavad regarding whether charoset is a mitzvah, whether we dip our matzah in charoset. What's the big deal? Okay, don't dip it. It's a hevel. So we have to think about that, and that I think relates to again the question I raised about the order. We'll talk about it at the end. I'm not doing anything in order today, but the order of when do we remember slavery? When do we remember freedom? Okay, it's very, very clear that it's not a linear order as we go through the Seder. All right, so whatever it is, 12 mitzvot, 64 mitzvot, etc., there may be more, but let me suggest to you a framework to remember it, whereby we would say as follows. We have essentially 2 mitzvot, d'oraita, and 4 mitzvot d'Rabbanan. I told you it has to be 4. Seder night after all. Right? 2 mitzvot d'oraita, 4 mitzvot d'Rabbanan. The 2 mitzvot d'oraita are achilat matzah and sipur yitziat Mitzrayim. We'll talk about each one in turn. The 4 mitzvot midrabbanan are maror, arba kosot, charoset if you count. Okay, again, it depends how we can, but we could say afikoman, which relates to matzah. But I would say so afikoman korech, right, the sandwich, right, and the mitzvah of halal. Halal, saying halal, which again, the Abu Draham also didn't count because he's talking about mitzvot masiyot and not mitzvot in speech. All right, so let's go through some of the main points about these various mitzvot. Let's start off with the arba kosot, the 4 cups of wine that we drink on the Seder. So again, why do we have 4 cups of wine? The answer is obvious, because on Seder night everything has to be 4, right? That's obviously why. But there are a number of different explanations as to why it is that we have 4. Now, the Rambam writes, probably the most famous, is not what the Rambam writes. Probably the most famous, Rashi says, we see it in the Gemara, that there are arba leshonot shel geula. There are 4 expressions of redemption, right at the beginning of Parashat Va'era. Votzeiti, v'tzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. Those are the 4 expressions. There is, of course, a 5th expression, v'heveti al haaretz, and therefore there were those who said that now there are those who say nowadays we should have a 5th cup of wine. In fact, this is where it's one explanation where the kosher Eliyahu comes from. Does Eliyahu Hanavi really come to visit on the Seder night? Right? When we were kids, we always wanted to know. We fill up the cup of the night. We come back in the morning. We check: did he come and did he drink from the cup? Right? But why is it kosher Eliyahu? So the simplest explanation is in the Gemara there is a machloket. Do we have 4 cups of wine or do we have 5 cups of wine? Because there are 4 expressions of redemption versus 5 expressions of redemption. Okay, it's a machloket. Who is going to come along and solve the machlokot for us one day? That is Eliyahu Hanavi, right? We say teku, which in modern Hebrew it's very amusing. In modern Hebrew, the word teku, which is a word from the Gemara, teku means let it stand. Okay, there are those who say that teku is an acronym or Rashi Tevot, Tishbi et haleitz koshiot bayot. Eliyahu Hanavi will come along and he will solve all the problems for us at the end of days. Okay, there are those who say, no, that's not the word. It's just maybe it's an abbreviation of the word tekum. Just let it stand, let it be. But the gematras are nice. They're Rashi Tevot. Eddie likes them. So we'll stick with that. But in modern Hebrew, the word tekum means a time. I remember Rabbi Sachs talking about this once. He said he came to Israel. He couldn't believe, everything was so frum. Arsenal versus Manchester United. Teku, Eliyahu Hanavi will come and resolve. I mean, it was very. It's very amusing. But in any event, so that is one explanation, that this fifth cup based on the machloket, and therefore it's named after Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay, but that is one explanation that we have for 4 cups. There are those who say that it's based on the fact that the word kos appears 4 times in the story of Yosef and the dream with the butler. We have to think about what exactly is the connection between that and Pesach and why so. But the Rambam gives a much more simpler, should I say, more halachic explanation. It says, when do we have a cup of wine? We have a cup of wine whenever we have a mitzvah, in order to give significance, to give a chashivut, right? We have every Shabbat, we do kiddush over a cup of wine. We do havdalah over a cup of wine. Again, the Torah said you have to make kiddush on Shabbat, but to fulfill kiddush midoraita, all you have to do is stand in shul and say vayachol, stand anywhere and say vayachol. You fulfilled the mitzvah doraita. Chachamim came along and said, no, that's not enough. You need to have it over a cup of wine. Same thing by havdalah. We have a wedding, we have a brit milah, we have a pidyon habet, whatever it is, we have a cup of wine. So says the Rambam, this is why we have 4 cups. He says, kol kos v'kos. Each one of the cups is its own bracha. We'll talk about the brachot in a moment, because that is also fascinating. Each of the 4 cups has is lending significance, lending gravitas to a certain section of the Seder. The first cup is Kiddush, right? And this year it's Havdalah as well, but it's primarily Kiddush. The second cup is for the Haggadah, for Magid. We are reading the cup. This is why we pour the second cup when we begin Magid. But usually we're also busy with the kapas and the thing, and everybody forgets, and we start reading the Haggadah, and then we get to the point where it says lift up the cup, and everybody says, wait a minute, when were we? So remember to fill up your cup at the beginning of Magid. When we have Birkat Hamazon, we do it over a kos. That is the third cup. The 4th cup goes with the halal. Okay, so those are the 4 cups of wine. That is why we have. Now, with the bracha, this is fascinating. How many brachot are we meant to say? Normally, if I drink more than 1 cup during a meal, I say a bracha at the beginning of the meal, and that's it. So, and this is actually the Sephardi custom, right? The first cup you have to say the bracha because you haven't yet drunk. The third cup you have to say the bracha because that's after Birkat Hamazon. So I understand. So according to Sephardim, you would only say the bracha of Brei Pragafen twice on the Seder night. Ashkenazim say it 4 times. For each cup we say Brei Pragafen. What's even more fascinating is if you go back and you see who are the Rishonim who take each view. So Tosfot, right, and the Ashkenazi Rishonim actually are the ones who say you only say 2 brachot, and it's the Rif and the Rambam, the Sephardi poskim, who say that you would say 4 brachot. So we have, this is one of those unique situations. It's not complete, but we have it by Hanukkah as well. We have different areas where the Ashkenazim follow the Sephardi Rishonim and the Sephardim follow the Ashkenazi Rishonim. I thought maybe there's a message in that. Pesach is a time all about coming together, all about, there's an idea of Achdut. We say, right, V'hisha Amda, Shelo Echad Bilvad Amad Aleinu L'Chaloteinu. Right, that's the famous, the famous vort. What does it mean? It means not just once, but in every generation they rise up to try and destroy us, if you haven't noticed. But the other, maybe another understanding is Shelo Echad Bilvad. When we are not one, as Haman says in Megillat Esther, Yeshnam Echad Mefuzam Mefarad Ben Amim, when we are scattered, when we are dispersed amongst ourselves, that is when our enemies have a hold against us. And therefore, there is a great importance to this idea of coming together as one. In fact, we see it throughout the Seder night. Right? When we dip, one of the questions of Manish Tana, right? Why do we dip twice on this night? Other nights we don't dip. Tonight we do dip, right? We dip twice. Why do we dip twice? So the Ben Ish Chai writes that we dip twice to remember the dipping that took place before the Galut and the dipping that took place before the Geulah. the dipping that took place before the Galut, when the brothers took the coat and they dipped it in blood, and just before the Geulah was a tikkun of that, where we dipped into the blood and put it on the doorpost the night that we left Egypt. In fact, the word karpas, what does karpas mean? So lots of explanations are given. Again, people like the gematrias, shishim, parech, but then the order is wrong. So the word karpas appears in Tanakh. You all know it. Megillas Esther, right? It refers to certain colorful decorations. There are those who say that karpas, that mean that ktonet pasim. Right? It's the same word, it's the same root. And we are alluding to, again, the hatred, the jealousy, the rivalry that took place between Yosef and Achim. That is what led to the Galut in order to come out of that. So we need to be together. So I think it's quite apt, and it's a point in peace that we find even halachic expression of this, that we do what the other side said, right? Maybe there's a hint to that. Okay, so that's in terms of the bracha. But why do we say a bracha on each cup of wine? So two explanations are given. One is that each cup is a mitzvah in and of itself. Right, we have to get to 64. So we count each cup as a mitzvah. That in itself is a somewhat strange explanation, because so what? It's its own mitzvah. It's not a berkata mitzvah, it's a berkata nanin. But that is what's brought. And also because there is, we have a hefsek in between the cups. There is a certain section of the Haggadah that we have to say, during which we could not eat, during which we could not drink. And therefore we have a hesech hadat, and then we start again to say the bracha. Just say, and this might be relevant for some people that are watching, but what happens if I am a Toshav Eretz Yisrael? I'm a resident of Israel, and I go to Chutz La'aretz for Pesach. So I ben Eretz Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, I am not, strictly speaking, obligated on the second day of Pesach. I am obligated. The halacha is, the accepted opinion is that on the second day of Yom Tov, even an Israeli in Chutz La'aretz cannot do malacha, certainly not in public, and even in private, according to most poskim, one should not be doing malacha. I remember when we used to go visit sometimes on Yom Tov, before we went on Shlichut, and I would walk into shul the second day, and everybody would say, and I would say, you walk in, you say, good Yom Tov, and people would say to me, oh, it's not Yom Tov for you, isn't it? I said, no, in public, we're meant to, we're not meant to draw attention to that fact. That's exactly what the halacha says. We don't want to cause a zilzul. We don't want to cause people to treat Yom Tov disparagingly, and therefore even an Israeli in Chutz La'aretz should keep, certainly in public, keep Yom Tov. But strictly speaking, that's correct. For you, it's not Yom Tov. So you would not be obligated in the second Seder. So we say the advice is, you should, if you're in company, you should be with them, you should sit at the Seder, but you're not actually obligated. So to say the bracha of alachidat matzah or alachidat maror, certainly you can't do. So the question is asked, what about the 4 cups? So you're sitting there and you're with everybody, and you say and you're drinking the cups. So then it's very, very questionable. Would you be able to say the bracha Aproi agafen by the second cup and the 4th cup? Probably not. And therefore you would have to hear it from somebody else. Okay, here we just have one Seder, so we don't have that problem. Right. So that is in terms of 4 cups of wine. Obviously, we know there is a sugya of haseva. We are meant to recline when we drink the cup of wine. This is also very interesting. Again, right from the outset, right from the beginning of the Seder, we are expressing our freedom. Drinking, reclining is the way that free people drink. It's meant to be more comfortable. That's what they say. Right now, one thing that is very important to know in terms of reclining, which some people get wrong. Let's say you're sitting on a chair like one of these. So if I'm sitting on the chair, we recline. The haseva is letzad small, it's to the left, and it doesn't matter if you're left-handed or right-handed. You still go to the left. The nafkamina, if you're between left-handed and right-handed, is in this case, normally would be in which hand you hold the cup. But in this case, no, everybody would hold the cup in the right hand and drink leaning to the left. I'm left-handed. I knew the halakha for many years that one has to recline to the left. I didn't know that you meant to hold the cup in the right hand. So it was very, very uncomfortable. Hold the cup in your left hand and lean to the left. When I discovered that you can hold it in the right, this is actually a lot more comfortable. All right. But reclining means you're reclining against something. So if I have a chair like this and I just lean to the left but in the air, that is not considered haseva. So either one would have to place, if you have a chair that has an armrest and you're leaning against that, you have a pillow which you're leaning against. The best thing to do with a chair like this is simply to turn the chair to the side, and then I lean to the left. I'm leaning against the back of the chair, and then I fulfill the mitzvah of haseva, according to everybody. Now, we have one of the Rishonim, the Ra'avya. The Ravia is very, very famous for this psak. This is the most famous psak. You mention the name Ravia in the Yeshiva world. They'll say, the Ravia who talks about Hasevan Leil HaSeder. That's what he's known for. He said many other things, many other important things, but everybody remembers him for this. Why? Because the Ravia says the following. He says, "Bizman hazeh she'en regilut ba'atzenu la'asev, she'en regilut b'nei chorin la'asev yeshev kedarku." What does he say? He says, why are you reclining? Why are you leaning to the left? Because that's the way that free people drink. That's the way that nobles drink. He says, nowadays, nobody does that. Right? The way, and again, he's writing hundreds of years ago. I don't know, maybe today, maybe it's gone back and everybody's lying on the couch with the cell phone in the one hand. Don't have your cell phone and let us say it. But that's what people do today. But he says, since we no longer recline, then on Leil HaSeder, we should not recline either. Now, the Sfaradim do not accept his psak at all. The Ashkenazim do not accept his psak lechatchila. We're willing to take it into account for a couple of cases of doubt, which we'll talk about in a moment. But why is that? What the Ravia says here is very, very logical. He says, you're doing this in order to be comfortable. You're doing this in order to show your freedom. But by doing this, you're not showing freedom. This is nobody does this. So why should you? So the answer is that, again, as much as I keep saying that Leil HaSeder is not about the past, but it's a reenactment. We are reliving, right? So the question is not whether nowadays the way of being free is by leaning. The question is, at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, was that the way of being free? And the answer is yes, and therefore we still do it. So therefore the Shulchan Aruch says we still lean. Now the Ramah, as I mentioned, the Ashkenazim, he says, Yesh Omrim, he says, nowadays, this is not what we do. This is not the way of freedom. You can therefore rely on the Ravia. Don't get too excited. So he says, therefore, in a case where, certain cases, if I forgot to lean, this comes up by the four cups. If between certain of the cups where I'm not allowed to drink extra, and I forgot to lean, so then I could rely on the Ravia for that fact. Okay, the Ramah says the same thing regarding women as well. Are women required to lean? So the Shulchan Aruch says, so he says a woman does not need to recline unless she is prominent. That's right. All the women today are prominent. They're all important. But says the Ramah, Kol Hanashim Shelanu Mikrei Chashuvot, they're talking about the times of aristocracy, etc. Because again, it goes back to whose custom was it to eat in such a way. So the Ramah says, Kol Hanashim Shelanu Mikrei Chashuvot. He says that's true. All of our women are important. Ach lo nagu la'asev. But the minhag today is not to lean. Because we rely again on the words of the Ravia. So therefore, bottom line, Ashkenazi women are allowed to recline if they want to, but it is not required. The men, it is required. Okay, so that is Kadesh. That is the first of the Simanim. That is the first of the four cups. We're gonna plug this in, running down battery. If it's we're still okay for the moment, but it's the one point and make it up. All right. So let's talk a little bit about matzah, which is a central mitzvah of Leil HaSeder. That is one of the mitzvot d'oraita. That's interesting. The Chatam Sofer points out that during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there were many mitzvot that we had related to food. Okay, nowadays, we still have many mitzvot related to food, but most of the mitzvot that we have are about when you should eat, but not necessarily about what you should eat. Right? We have mitzvah, we have Sudot Shabbat, we have Sudot Yom Tov, we have Erev Yom Kippur, we have eating in the Sukkah, all sorts of things. But where it's a Hefzer Shal Mitzvah, where the food itself is a mitzvah. So you used to have Korban Pesach, you had Truma, you had Maser Sheni, you had many Korbanot, you had many different examples of food where it's a mitzvah to eat that food. Maybe we have as well Perot Shemitah. That's the other one. But according to everybody, matzah is the one remnant that we have of a mitzvah d'oraita to eat a specific food. So we need to take advantage of it. Maybe this is why everybody is so into the chumras when it comes to matzah, right? This is the last remnant we have. This is the last food we have where it's a mitzvah to eat that specific food, and that's why we say bracha, unique bracha that we don't have to say mitzvah al achilat. Where else do we say a bracha al achilat? We don't know. So we say the bracha of al achilat matzah, and we say the bracha of al achilat maror. Maror is drabanan, right? Nowadays, in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, with the Korban Pesach, maror was also doraita, but nowadays that's drabanan. But matzah is doraita. Now, when do we fulfill the mitzvah of eating the matzah? So here we have a machloket. When do we fulfill the mitzvah of eating kazait matzah? You know, motzi matzah, right? It's even one of the simanim of the seder. So that is, according to many poskim, that is correct. However, Rashi doesn't learn that way. Rashi says no. He says, when do you fulfill the? Remember what we said, minas vachim min psachim, right? That just like the Korban Pesach and the matzah was eaten together with the Korban Pesach, that is eaten ala sova. It's actually eaten at the end of the meal. So Rashi says, when we eat at the end of the meal, the afikoman, he says that is the matzah mitzvah. So the mitzvah of matzah, l'shem, right, fulfilling that is the matzah that I eat not at the beginning, but at the end. So according to that, when I say the bracha of al achilat matzah, I have to have in mind that I'm saying the bracha of al achilat matzah, which is for the matzah I'm eating now, and for the matzah I'm eating at the end of the Suda. And you can tell your grandkids they aren't allowed to speak from now until they get to the until they get there. Good luck. All right. So that's that raises a question, by the way, which is, if we are, according to the other poskim, I understand, if I say that the matzah with which I fulfill the mitzvah is the matzah at the beginning of the seder, so I'm saying the bracha. But why am I saying the bracha now if I'm only going to fulfill the mitzvah later? Why can't I say motzi lechem min haaretz now and later say the bracha of al achilat matzah, according to Rashi? So the Gemara has a sugya. The Gemara does not address this question, but addresses a different question, which is, what if a person only has one vegetable? By the way, when we say karpas, we remember as well, we say the bracha of Aproi adama. I understand why I say Aproi adama, because I haven't yet said hamotzi, but I have to have in mind that Aproi adama that I say of the karpas applies also for the maror. Even though that is after hamotzi, that's not a food you would normally eat as part of the meal. Therefore, it has its own bracha. Just like on Rosh Hashanah, when we have the simanim, the apples and honey and pomegranates and whatever other simanim you want, you say borei pri'aitz, even though you've already said hamotzi, because it's not a normal part of the meal. So when we say a borei pri'adama on karpas, we have in mind for maror as well. When we eat the karpas, despite the fact that we're all very hungry, one should have less than a kazait. According to the Rambam, you should actually have more than a kazait, but generally we accept that you have less than a kazait because we don't want to get into a question of regarding bracha or not. Okay. But the Gemara says like this. If I only have one vegetable, because for karpas I can use any vegetable. So what if a person only has lettuce, romaine lettuce, with which we would fulfill the mitzvah, which is a bitter herb? So I'm going to eat that for karpas, and then afterwards I'm going to come and say the bracha of maror, but I've already eaten maror. It says, how can you be? You're going to malay kresor and vazi varech. So therefore, it says discussion Rav Huna, Rav Chisda, but we would say based on that we would say the bracha before, because the first time you eat you have to say the bracha, and then you go back and then you'll fulfill the mitzvah again, and then you'll eat it again. The truth is, we find this in a number of places. Rav Asher Weiss wants to prove from here that I'm allowed to, even if I've already fulfilled a mitzvah, I can then go back and in a suboptimal way, I can then go back and I can fulfill it in the more optimal way again. So I've said the bracha, I've fulfilled the mitzvah. If I was to ask you, if you only had lettuce after you ate the karpas, have you fulfilled? Yes, you fulfilled. You've eaten the lettuce. But the proper way to eat it is with the maror, is with the matzah, etc. I can go back and do it again. So he says, where else do we see this? We see this by Rosh Hashanah, for example, with tkiyot miyushav and tkiyot mu'umad. Everybody asks the question. The main tkiyot that we have on Rosh Hashanah are tkiyot mu'umad, with the brachot of malchiot, zichronot, shofrot. Okay, but we do the tkiyot, but why do we go? This is not a shir on Rosh Hashanah, so I'm not getting into all the technicalities. But we do the tkiyot miyushav beforehand. Since we're doing the tkiyot miyushav, we're blowing 30 tkiyot, we fulfilled the mitzvah, we've heard the shofar. So we say the bracha then. But then we go back and we blow the shofar again. So we we begin, we say the bracha, we perform it for whatever reason that we have, that we perform it in a suboptimal way, put it like that, but then we go back again and fulfill it in an optimal way again. So we would say the same thing according to Rashi. We're going to start off the meal with matzah, because you have to start off your meal with your bread, which is matzah in this case, because we don't eat bread on Pesach. Okay? So we say the bracha, but really then we go back and we fulfill, later on, that's when we fulfill the mitzvah. Now the nafkamina is, according to Rashi, if I say that the afikoman is actually the mitzvah of matzah, so then when I think about how much is a kazayit, then I would have to, according to Rashi, I would have to eat maybe a little bit more. Maybe I would have to go according to those shittot. Okay, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Don't have time to talk about much else, but we'll finish talking about matzah. So we say like this: one of the unique things, how many matzot do we have? Right, on the Seder plate, we have 3. Right, we would think we would have 4. Everything is 4. So it's actually brought in some of the poskim that there was once upon a time there was a minhag where they had a 4th matzah, and the 4th matzah was called the matzat safek. Right, it was matzah in case. It's not like nowadays. Nowadays you walk into any supermarket that you want, and you've got whatever matzah you want. Matzah shmura from this and shmura from that, and with this hechsher and that hechsher, you can get whatever you want. It's very, very easy. Even Erev Pesach, you walk there. For most of Jewish history, it wasn't like that. Most Jewish, you had the 3 matzot now, and that was it. And if you had them, you were lucky. So what happens if we need these whole complete matzot? Remember once I spent a Seder with somebody, we got on Erev Pesach, and he ordered a special box of handmade shmura matzahs, and he opens them, and every single matzah was cracked. He was trying to find this whole matzah, he couldn't find it. So we need for Lechem Mishnah, we need the kikarot shlemot, matzot shlemot. So they would have the 3 matzot which they had, and they had a fourth one which was a spare in case one of the matzot broke, got damaged, or whatever it was. But we have 3. So why do we have 3? So that's everybody, right? Kohen, Levi, Israel, right? We have the symbolism of 3. There are those who say 3 according to the Keneged Shlosh Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Actually, it's fascinating to think about where Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov appear in the Seder. Here's another one for you. Here's a trivia for you. You can ask your kids, you can ask your grandkids on Seder night. Where do we find an analogy, allusion, a remez, a hint to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov throughout the Seder? Okay, it's not explicit. Well, there are some explicit mentions, but that's another one. It just happens to be that it works out that way, and we have the symbolism. But the real reason why, I'm sorry to disappoint you all, but the real reason we have the 3 matzot is a halachic reason, and it's not got to do with any of that. And the reason is as follows: any other Yom Tov or Shabbos meal, we have 2 loaves. Okay, we have lechem mishnah because the double portion of man and flour. We know. On Pesach, we have a problem. What's our problem? Our problem is that the matzah is called, and again, is it freedom? Is it slavery? It's both. Matzah is called lechem oni. There are different interpretations. What does lechem oni mean? But one of them is poor man's bread. How does an ani eat? How does a poor man? He does not have a full loaf. He has a half. He keeps half it. He keeps away. He keeps for later. Whatever it is, but it's broken. We have to have a broken matzah to represent the fact that it's lechem oni. So on the one hand, we need to have 2 matzot because we need to have 2 full matzot. On the other hand, our matzah needs to be broken. So how can we have 2 complete and 1 that is broken? The answer is we have 3. And therefore we have 3. So we use 2 to have still for Lechem Mishnah, 1 which is broken. But now we have another problem, which some of the Rishonim say, and it's like, I don't understand. If the whole point of matzah is that it's Lechem Oni, that it's meant to be broken, so you're meant to have less. So now you're telling me you're going to have more. This is the ultimate case of less is more, right? Normally, I only have 2. Now I have 3. I have 3 because one of them has to be broken. But if the one that's broken is in addition to the 2 that are whole, well, it's started etc. So therefore, there are those. But then what do you do about Lechem Mishnah? Lechem Mishnah has to be whole. So there are those who say, on Pesach, you don't need Lechem Mishnah. On Pesach, you need 1.5, and that is more. That is the complete. That is the amount you have to have. But again, our minhag is that we have 3. Therefore, we have the 2 for the Lechem Mishnah, and we have the 1 that is broken. We then get into a problem, which is when we say the bracha, we say 2 brachot, right? Motzi matzah. We say it in one go in the song, but it's actually, those are 2 of the stages of the 15. Now, Abu Draham counted as 2 separate mitzvot. So we have motzi, which is like we have on any other Shabbos and Yom Tov, which is hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So where would we partake from for the motzi? We would partake from the whole matzah. But then we say matzah, so right, the unique bracha of al achilat matzah. From that we take from the broken one. It can't be whole and broken at the same time, right? Whether I have 1.5 matzot as Malach Mishnah, I have 2.5 as Malach Mishnah Peseder, but one matzah is whole and one matzah is broken, and therefore says the Rosh, when I say these two brachot, the two brachot relate to two different matzot. One relates to the whole, one relates to the half. So then I have to have a kazait from each. So I have to have two kazaitot, not just one kazait. Okay, that is the Rosh, the Shulchan Aruch paskins this, Mishnah Berurah, everybody paskins this Chumrah. One thing which I've never understood, and I'll share with you, which is, I can understand if we say we want to have two kazaitot. So the person who is saying the brachot, because generally speaking, one person who's leading the Seder, there are places, different minhagim. I've been at Seder nights where every man has got his own Seder plate, okay? And everyone says their own brachot. But so for the rest of the family, the person who's saying the brachot, he is going to eat two kazaitot. But for everybody else who's just getting, there's no obligation, by the way, to eat from the matzah that person is. You have other shema matzah on the table. You can have from there as well. Especially if you have a lot of people at the seder, especially if you want to share chazon ish, you're not going to have enough matzah to go around in that first matzah. So why would anybody else, meaning the one who's not making the bracha, be required to eat two kazaitot? I don't know. I've never heard a good answer for that, but nonetheless, that's what the Mishnah Berurah writes, and that's what that we should try and have two kazaitot for the beginning of matzah. Okay, for korech is less. Korech is the rabbanan. There's something else, and again, then for the afikoman, there are those who actually want to say as well that for the afikoman you should have two kazaitot. One is zechel pesach, zechel chagigah, different reasons. Okay, but the big question is, right, and we definitely don't have time to go into this fully. But the big question is, how much is a kazayit? But there is one thing here which I will say, which is very, very useful. There's also a requirement for how much we're meant to eat, how much matzah. There's also a requirement for in what time period we're meant to eat. Right? If you eat the kazayit matzah it takes you the whole night, you've not fulfilled the mitzvah. At the same time, there are places. I was at a seder once where I think I've told you this. The person who was leading the Seder was sitting there and he was eating his matzah and he was looking at his watch and he was eating and he wanted to keep all the chumras. This was a chumrah shemevili deku, because he wanted to have the chazay. And he's sitting there and he's eating. He's like, one matzah. I can't eat anymore. I can't eat any more matzah. This is terrible. I don't believe that that's the way that it's meant to be. At the end of the day, there are different shittot and there are different chumras, but I'm a big believer that things are meant to be natural, right? To whatever extent. It's not meant to be an artificial form of eating. It's meant to be a normal form. If a person sits, again, the matzah has to be eaten by seva, but a person sits and eats in a normal way. You don't have to stuff the matzah into your mouth one bit after the other and to the point where you make yourself sick. In fact, you should not do that. Right? A person sits and eats the way that a person would normally eat. You'll eat it in enough time and you will be okay. How much do we have to eat? So let me just say a few words about shiurim. And that will close. A few years ago, at the Kenes Torah v'Mada, I got this book. It's called Midah Keneged Midah. I mentioned it to you previously. He talks about the different calculations and the different measurements of in the Torah. Really some fascinating ideas. He has here a chapter called "Have Eggs Gotten Smaller Since Matan Torah?" Okay, and this is the famous discussion. When we talk about the shiurim, we mentioned last week in terms of the amount of how much the abakosot have to be, but also when it comes to matzah, when it comes to kazayit, etc. Because what does kazayit mean? Kazayit means the size of an olive, right? I have a book at home called, actually I have it here, it's called the Hilchot Kazayit. An amazing book. It goes through all different foods and it has full color photographs of how much would be considered a kazayit. So one of the pages in the book, it says how many olives would be the size of a kazayit. Right? What do you mean how many? Kazayit means the size of an olive, but which olive? Whose olive? Right? And there is an understanding that the olives in the size of the Torah, at the time of the Torah, were a different size how the olives are nowadays. Throughout Shas, we have different ways of measuring this. We measure it by the measurements of eggs. There are places where it's measured by the size of thumbs. Okay, but basically the thesis of this book, which is fascinating, he says everybody was measuring the size of a thumb this way, but he says actually you should measure the size of the thumb this way. And if you do that, everything works out. Okay, that's his. You can see afterwards. That's his understanding. But basically, where this became very, very controversial was the Rabbi Yehuda in the 18th century in Prague, and then Rabbi Yehuda realizes that the things don't really make sense to him, the calculations, and he comes to the conclusion that eggs nowadays are not the same size as they were in the days of the Torah, and essentially his calculations forces us to more or less double all the shiurim that we have. The one who made it popular nowadays is the Chazon Ish, and this is why what's called Shiur Chazon Ish. The Shiur Chazon Ish is really the Shiur Rabbi Yehuda, but we call it the Shiur Chazon Ish, and that is much larger. Now, why am I saying all of this? For the following reason. When we talk about matzah, how much matzah do we have to eat for the original, to fulfill the basic mitzvah of the Seder night? So whenever we have, generally speaking, whenever we have a mitzvah related to achilah, the amount is kazayit. That's the basic measurement. As we've explained, because of the fact that we have the whole matzah and the half matzah and various other reasons, so we say that we try to have 2 kazaytot for the mitzvah, but that's a chumrah. Okay, we say the Shulchan Aruch says it and the Mishnah Berurah says it. It says lechatchila you should have b'diavad. If you had just 1 kazayit, you've still fulfilled the mitzvah. So we say like this: if I have the amount which is 2 kazaytot, which is according to the Chazon Ish, which is according to the largest measurement, it's going to be a very, very large amount of matzah, and it's going to be very, very difficult. But if I say that eating 2 kazaytot, that in itself is a chumrah, so then I can say the following: I can say mima nafshach. I say I'm going to eat an amount which is enough that it's definitely going to be 1 kazayit, according to the larger measurement, according to the Shiur Chazon Ish. Okay. At the same time, if the halacha is that I'm required to have 2 kazaytot, well, according to the smaller measurement, it's 2 kazaytot, and therefore I don't have to go crazy, and I can fulfill it that way. Rav Rimon has in his Haggadah, also in the Jewish Action magazine, has got photos as well. So you can take the 2 and you can compare them, and you can see whose kazayit is bigger. I don't remember exactly which measurements they use, but I think he says 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of a machine matzah, and you can work out exactly how much that is if you're using a hand matzah. That would fulfill this. And again, that way you get. We don't have to take every chumrah in the book. As I say, we always say it. Shechter said many times, when a person takes on a chumrah, so you have to think you're taking on a chumrah in one thing, it's coming at the expense of something else. Right? And that's why we have a principle in halakha of chumrah shatin mevilite kula. We don't want a chumrah that's going to cause us to be lenient in other things. So one of the examples he gives, he says a person goes and a person spends thousands of dollars on their etrog, right? But there are poor people who don't have food. You have Simchat Yom Tov. You have to go and buy a wife and you dress for Yom Tov. That's a mitzvah d'oraita. So you're not going to be able to afford it because you want to spend money on your etrog. There's a chumrah here. There's a kula there. You have to decide where we're going to. So as well. And if you're going to take on, really feel that if you're going to take on every chumrah in the book and you're going to say we're going to eat the 2 kazaytot Chazon Ish for this and 2 kazaytot Chazon Ish for this, and you're sitting there and your Seder experience becomes one of stomachache. I'm not sure that is ultimately the greatest hiddur, and I think there are other ways of finding chumras as well. But I think the halachic logic over here seems to me to be very, very sound. Again, you have 3/4 of a matzah, and maybe even a bit less than that. But certainly, if you have 3/4 of a matzah, so you have, if the halacha is that you need to have 2 kazaytot, according to the smaller measurement, you've had 2 kazaytot. If the halacha is that you need the Shiur Chazon Ish, you've had the Shiur Chazon Ish. You don't have both chumras together. Okay, when it comes to the korech, one can have less, and again by the afikoman, one can have less as well. Half a matzah is more than satisfactory for the afikoman. Again, that does not have to be from the matzah that was hidden and is probably has been stepped on, and all the kids have it's the crumbs. You don't have to. You can have from any shmar matzah that's been on the table, it's been brought to the table. That way one fulfills the mitzvah as well. We don't talk about halal, which comes later, but obviously many, many things to talk about. Like I said, if anybody's interested in the Tzomam Rabbanan unit of Leila Seder, I can send that to you digitally. And wishing everybody a chag kasher v'sameach. We should be zochet to fulfill all of the mitzvot and le'echol min ha'psachim u'min ha'zvachim u'min ha'psachim already this year. If not this year, the next year. And chag sameach to everyone. Wow.